I still remember the night the call came, the kind of night that splits your life into a before and an after. It was just past midnight, the rain was hammering the windows, and I was sitting alone in the living room with a half-empty glass of scotch. Clara had gone to bed hours ago, claiming a migraine. The house was silent, except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the occasional groan of the old pipes. I was thinking about nothing in particular, or maybe I was thinking about everything. About how quiet the house had become since Ethan stopped calling. About how silence had slowly filled the spaces where laughter used to live. The phone shattered that silence. It rang once, twice. I stared at it, a dull sense of dread creeping into my chest. No one calls at midnight with good news. I picked it up. "Mr. Hughes?" a male voice asked, tight and formal. "This is Officer Lyman from the county sheriff's office. Are you the father of Ethan Hughes?" The room tilted slightly beneath me. My tongue felt dry. "Yes," I said. What happened?" "We found your son," the officer said. "He's alive, but he's in critical condition. We need you to come to St. Matthew's General immediately." There was a roaring in my ears, like the sound of a wave pulling back from shore. "Found him?" I repeated, my voice distant. "Found him where?" "In a ditch off County Road 17, Lyman said. "He was badly beaten and left for dead. We don't know how long he'd been there." My heart stopped for a moment, then it slammed back to life, beating wildly against my ribs. I'm on my way. The drive to the hospital was a blur of wet asphalt and streaking headlights. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I kept telling myself he'd be fine. He had to be fine. People survive worse things, right? But then the darker thoughts crept in, the ones I'd been pushing away for years. The fights, the slammed doors, the words we'd said that couldn't be unsaid. I hadn't seen my son in almost 6 months. The last time we spoke, he told me he never wanted to hear my voice again. And the truth was, I didn't blame him. I'd chosen silence when I should have defended him. I'd chosen my wife over my son, over and over again. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and despair. Bright fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a sterile glow. At the reception desk, I stammered out my son's name, and a nurse led me down a long corridor. My shoes squeaked against the polished floor. The hallway seemed endless. When I finally saw him, I stopped breathing. Ethan lay on the hospital bed, motionless, tubes snaking from his arms, bruises painting his face in deep purples and angry reds. His lips were split. There was dried blood crusted along his hairline. The strong, defiant young man I'd raised looked like a broken child. "Dad," his voice was barely a whisper. His eyes fluttered open for a second, cloudy, distant. I leaned in close, terrified he'd slip away before he spoke. "I'm here, son," I said, my throat burning. "I'm here, you're safe now." His lips trembled as he tried to form words. He swallowed, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "It was my wife." Then his eyes rolled back and the monitors began to scream. Nurses rushed in, shoving me aside as they fought to stabilize him. I stumbled into the hallway, my knees weak, my mind spinning. "My wife." Said my wife. I called Clara from the waiting room, my voice shaking. She answered on the second ring, groggy and irritated. "Daniel, what's wrong? It's 1 a.m. "It's Ethan," I said. "He's in the hospital. They found him in a ditch. He's barely alive." There was a pause, too long of a pause. "What?" she finally said, her voice trembling just enough to sound believable. "Oh my God, is he going to make it?" "I don't know," I whispered. "But Clara, he said something before he passed out." "What did he say?" I hesitated, listening for something, guilt, fear, anything in her voice. But there was nothing but practiced concern. "He said, it was my wife." Silence, then a sharp inhale. "He must have been delirious," she said quickly. "He doesn't know what he's talking about." Maybe she was right, maybe he was delirious. But something in her tone, too calm, too rehearsed, made my stomach twist. The hours crawled by. Doctors came and went, their words a blur. Internal bleeding, head trauma, broken ribs. They didn't know if he'd make it through the night. I sat by his bedside, watching the rise and fall of his chest, and for the first time in years, I prayed. I prayed for another chance to tell my son I loved him, to say I was sorry. When the sun finally bled through the blinds, Clara arrived. She looked immaculate, as always, hair brushed, makeup flawless, but there was something brittle in the way she clutched her purse. She rushed to Ethan's bedside and placed a hand on his arm. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered, her voice quivering. "My sweet boy." I watched her closely. The tears were there, but they felt hollow, performed like everything else she did. "Where were you last night?" I asked quietly. She blinked, caught off guard. "At home, in bed. Where else would I be?" "Did you go out?" "No," she said too quickly. "Why would I?" I didn't press further. Not yet, but the seed of doubt had already taken root. The next few days blurred together. Ethan remained unconscious, trapped somewhere between life and death. The police came by to take my statement, asking about enemies, grudges, anything that could explain the attack. I told them the truth. Ethan had distanced himself from us, fallen in with musicians and promoters I barely knew. He'd made enemies, but I didn't tell them about what he'd whispered. Not yet. Because I wasn't sure, I believed it myself. But that night, as I sat alone by his bedside, the words wouldn't stop replaying in my mind. It was my wife. They echoed like a curse, worming their way into every thought. I looked at Ethan's battered body, at the tubes and wires keeping him alive, and then I thought about Clara, about the way she dismissed him, belittled him, turned me against him. About the night she said, "That boy will ruin everything if you keep indulging him." I remembered the time she found out he'd dropped out of law school, how she'd thrown a vase against the wall, screaming that he'd humiliated her. I remembered the day he left home, shouting that he'd rather die than be part of this perfect little nightmare of a family. And I remembered how, through it all, I'd said nothing. I thought I was keeping the peace, but maybe, by keeping quiet, I built the perfect conditions for something far darker to grow. The next morning, I went through Ethan's things. The police had returned his belongings, a phone, a wallet, a crumpled pack of cigarettes. The phone was smashed, the screen cracked beyond recognition, but the voicemail still worked. There were several messages from friends, a few from promoters, and one from Clara. It was time-stamped 3 days before the attack. "Ethan," her voice hissed through the speaker, low and controlled. "We need to talk. You will meet me, or I'll make sure you regret every decision you've ever made." My blood went cold. That night, I sat in the darkened kitchen, the voicemail playing over and over. Clara walked in, wearing her silk robe, a glass of wine in hand. "You're up late," she said softly. I looked up at her, my chest tight with a storm I'd spent decades suppressing. "Why did you call Ethan 3 days ago?" She blinked, feigning confusion. "What are you talking about?" "I heard the voicemail," my voice cracked, "the one where you threatened him." Her lips parted slightly, then curved into a small, cold smile. "I didn't threaten him, I just wanted to talk. He's my stepson. I was trying to make peace." "Peace?" I whispered. "You told him he'd regret every decision he's ever made." Her expression hardened. "Because he's destroying this family, Daniel. He's always been a problem, you know that." My heart broke in that moment, not because of what she said, but because I realized I'd known the truth all along. I just never had the courage to face it. As I stood there, the rain starting up again outside, I made myself a promise. No more silence. No more excuses. Whatever had happened to Ethan, whoever had done this, I was going to find out, even if it meant tearing my life apart. Because my son had almost died in a ditch, and his last breath was a warning. And for the first time in my life, I was finally ready to listen. The days after Ethan's attack stretched and blurred into one long, sleepless vigil. I spent most of my time in the hospital, staring at the beeping monitors and the soft rise and fall of his chest. Every hour that passed felt like a fragile victory, as though he were fighting his way back from the edge inch by inch. Clara came and went, always in carefully chosen outfits, always with a box of pastries for the nurses or a bouquet of flowers for the room. She cried when people were watching, sighed dramatically when doctors delivered updates, and clung to my arm as though she were the one who had almost lost everything. To anyone else, she looked like the perfect wife and stepmother, but I knew better now, or at least I was starting to. I watched her closely, replaying that voicemail in my mind, hearing the venom in her words. She had told Ethan he would regret everything, and now he was lying here, broken and bloodied. I didn't believe in coincidences anymore. While Ethan lay unconscious, I started piecing together the fragments of our past, searching for the first crack in the illusion. It was strange how memories shifted when you looked at them from a different angle, How things that once seemed insignificant suddenly pulsed with meaning. I met Clara when I was 34, a widower with a 6-year-old boy and a heart full of guilt. My first wife, Laura, had died suddenly, an aneurysm that stole her from us in a single brutal moment. For years, it was just Ethan and me. And then Clara swept into our lives like a storm in silk heels and red lipstick. She was confident, intelligent, intoxicating. I fell hard and fast. She seemed to love Ethan too, at least at first. She took him to the zoo, read him bedtime stories, bought him birthday presents more extravagant than anything I could afford. But things started to change as Ethan grew older. She wanted him to be polished, disciplined, obedient, all the things she believed a successful man should be. She hated his messy handwriting, his obsession with music, the way he challenged her rules. "You're too lenient with him," she'd tell me. "You let him walk all over you. That boy needs structure." I told myself she was trying to help, that she wanted the best for him. But the older Ethan got, the sharper their clashes became. By the time he was a teenager, they could barely be in the same room without a fight erupting. I still remember the night it all started to unravel. Ethan was 17. He had just come home from band practice, his guitar slung over his shoulder, his hair sticking to his forehead with sweat. Clara was waiting in the living room. "You missed dinner again," she said, her voice cold. "I told you we had rehearsal," Ethan replied, dropping his backpack by the door. "I don't care about your rehearsal," she snapped. "You're failing 2 classes. You think you're going to make a living strumming that thing on a street corner." "It's music, Clara," he shot back, "and yeah, maybe I will." She sneered. "You'll be lucky if you're not living under a bridge by 25. I should have stepped in, I should have defended him, but instead, I said nothing. I watched them tear each other apart and told myself it was just growing pains. The fights only got worse. When Ethan got into college for music composition instead of law school, Clara lost it completely. She accused him of throwing away his future. She told me I was enabling him, and when he finally dropped out to start a band, she stopped speaking to him entirely. The last time they saw each other before the attack, it ended with Ethan shouting that she was poison and Clara slapping him across the face. He stormed out that night and never came back. I thought that was the worst it could get. I was wrong. A week after the attack, Detective Lyman returned to the hospital. He asked if I could meet him downstairs for a few minutes. We sat in a small conference room, the kind used for breaking bad news. He folded his hands on the table. "Mr. Hughes," he began, "I wanted to update you on the investigation. We're starting to believe this might not have been a random attack." I felt my stomach tighten. "What makes you say that?" "For one, there was no robbery," Lyman said. "Your son's wallet, phone, and watch were all still on him. Second, the injuries indicate he was beaten by someone he knew, someone who was angry. It wasn't just an assault, it was personal." My heart pounded. "Do you have any suspects?" He hesitated. "We're exploring a few leads. I understand there was some tension between your wife and your son." The question hung heavy in the air. I stared at my hands. "Yes," I admitted, "they didn't get along." "Would you say it was hostile?" "Yes," my voice was barely a whisper. Lyman nodded, scribbling something into his notebook. "We're not jumping to conclusions, but we may need to speak with her." When I returned to Ethan's room, Clara was there, arranging flowers in a vase. "The detective wants to talk to you," I said quietly. Her hands froze mid-motion. "About what?" "You know about what?" Her eyes flashed. "This is ridiculous, Daniel. You're not actually entertaining the idea that I had something to do with this, are you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. She slammed the vase down on the table, water sloshing over the rim. "He's always hated me. Always. And you've always let him. You've let him blame me for everything wrong in his life." "Maybe because you were part of the problem," I said, my voice trembling. "Maybe because you never saw him as a person, just an obstacle." Her face twisted into something sharp and unfamiliar. "You have no idea what that boy has done." "What has he done?" But she didn't answer. She just grabbed her purse and stormed out. That night, I called one of Ethan's old friends, a guy named Mason who had been with him since their first band. We hadn't spoken in years, but when he heard what had happened, he drove straight to the hospital. "Ethan told me he was scared," Mason said, sitting across from me in the cafeteria. Said someone was following him. Following him, I felt the blood drain from my face. Who? He wouldn't say, but he told me that if anything ever happened, it wouldn't be a stranger. It would be someone close. The words hit me like a punch. Someone close. Later that night, unable to sleep, I went through Ethan's apartment. The place was small and cluttered, walls lined with old posters and guitar cases. There were unopened bills on the kitchen counter, empty beer bottles by the sink. But on his desk, beneath a pile of lyric sheets, I found something that made my heart stop, a letter. My name was scrawled across the envelope. Dad, it began. If you're reading this, it probably means something gone wrong. I didn't want to believe it, but I think Clara is hiding something. I don't know what yet, but I'm getting close. Please, if anything happens to me, don't let her spin her lies. Trust your gut. I know you still have one. My hands were shaking by the time I finished reading. Ethan had been investigating her. He knew something dangerous. The next morning, I confronted her. She was in the kitchen, sipping coffee and scrolling through her phone like nothing had happened. I found a letter from Ethan, I said. Her eyes flickered just for a second, and he thinks you were hiding something. She set the cup down slowly. Of course he does. He's always looking for someone to blame. What are you hiding, Clara? She smiled, a thin, humorless smile that didn't reach her eyes. Careful, Daniel. Accusations like that can destroy a marriage. Maybe this marriage deserves to be destroyed. For the first time in years, I saw something break behind her perfect composure. A flash of anger, a sliver of fear. Then, as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. I've done nothing wrong, she said, her voice icy. And until you have proof, I suggest you remember who's been by your side all these years. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat in the dark, watching the rain streak down the window, and thought about everything I'd ignored: the lies, the manipulation, the slow, calculated way she'd cut Ethan out of our lives. I thought about the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest as a baby, the teenager who played guitar until his fingers bled, the man who had every reason to hate me but still whispered for me when he was dying. And for the first time in a long time, I hated myself. I had spent years trying to keep the peace, trying to hold the pieces of this fractured family together. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all, it's surrender. And I had surrendered so many times, I no longer knew who I was fighting for. But now I knew one thing with absolute certainty: I wasn't going to surrender anymore. Not to Clara, not to fear, not to the lies I'd been living in. If my wife had anything to do with what happened to my son, I was going to find out. And when I did, there would be no more silence. Only truth, even if that truth destroyed everything we had left. The following week was a study in contradictions. On the surface, life moved forward with cold, indifferent precision. Doctors did their rounds, nurses checked Ethan's vitals, detectives followed leads. But beneath that facade, my world was slowly splintering apart. Every new detail I uncovered about Clara felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Each discovery wasn't just about her, it was about me too. The choices I'd made, the red flags I'd ignored, the man I had allowed myself to become. It was a Tuesday morning when Detective Lyman called. "Mr. Hughes," he said, his voice measured, "we have some developments. Could you come down to the precinct?" I hesitated. Is this about Clara? There was a pause on the line. "We just need you to see something." I arrived half an hour later, my stomach in knots. Lyman met me at the front desk and led me into a small room with a metal table and a single laptop. He clicked on a video file, and grainy black and white footage appeared on the screen. It was from a traffic camera near County Road 17, the road where Ethan had been found. The timestamp read 10:47 p.m. the night of the attack. The image showed a dark sedan pulling over to the shoulder, its headlights cutting through the rain. A figure stepped out, holding an umbrella, and walked toward the edge of the ditch. The footage was blurry, the rain distorting everything. But I didn't need clarity. I recognized the car immediately. It was Clara's. "Do you know this vehicle?" Lyman asked, even though he already knew the answer. "Yes," I whispered, "it's my wife." "We can't confirm the identity of the person in the video," he said carefully. "But this places her vehicle near the scene, minutes before we believe your son was attacked." My throat went dry. "Have you spoken to her?" "Not yet. We're building a timeline, but I thought you should see this first." I stared at the frozen frame of that car, headlights glaring like accusing eyes. 1,000 memories flooded my mind: dinners, vacations, late-night conversations, all of them tainted now, poisoned by the possibility that the woman I shared a life with might have tried to kill my son. That night, I confronted her. I waited until she was seated in the living room, scrolling through her tablet with a glass of red wine in hand. She looked up as I entered, her smile as composed as ever. "You were near County Road 17 the night Ethan was attacked," I said flatly. She blinked once, twice. "What?" "I saw the footage. Your car was there, don't lie to me." Her expression didn't change, but I saw the subtle tension in her jaw. "I went for a drive that night," she said, too calmly. "I needed to clear my head." "Near the ditch where Ethan was almost beaten to death," my voice cracked. "Are you expecting me to believe that's a coincidence?" She sighed, placing the wine glass down carefully. "I didn't hurt him, Daniel. I would never hurt him." "Then why were you there?" "Because I was supposed to meet him." Her voice was steady, but there was a flicker of something, fear, maybe, in her eyes. "He called me, said he wanted to talk, to make peace. I thought maybe we could fix things." "Did you?" I asked. She shook her head. "He never showed. I waited for 20 minutes, then I left." The lie was thin. I could hear it cracking under its own weight. "He didn't call you, Clara. You called him. I heard the voicemail. You threatened him." Something cold passed over her face. "You're twisting things. I was angry, yes. I said things I shouldn't have, but I didn't touch him." I stared at her, searching for a hint of remorse, a shadow of guilt, anything human. But all I saw was control, composure, calculation. "Do you know what he said before he passed out?" I asked quietly. "He said it was my wife." Her mask faltered for just a moment, a tiny crack, but it was enough. She stood abruptly, brushing invisible dust from her dress. "I'm not discussing this anymore. If you want to believe the ramblings of a delirious boy over the woman you've shared a life with for 20 years, that's your choice." And with that, she walked out of the room. I sank into the nearest chair, my body trembling. I didn't know what was worse, that I might be married to a monster, or that part of me still didn't want to believe it. The next day, I hired a private investigator. His name was Carter, a retired cop with a cynical sense of humor and a reputation for finding things people didn't want found. I handed him everything: Clara's phone number, her financial records, the timeline of that night. A week later, he called. "You might want to sit down," he said. The first thing he showed me was a series of bank transfers, large sums of money moved from our joint account into an offshore account under Clara's maiden name. Nearly $500,000 over 3 years. "She's been planning an escape," Carter said. "Money like this doesn't move unless someone's preparing for a life without you." Then he showed me phone records. Dozens of calls and messages exchanged with a man named Victor Hammond, a promoter who had worked with Ethan's band before they mysteriously lost their record deal. "Your wife and this guy met several times over the last 6 months," Carter explained. "Restaurants, hotels, it's not hard to connect the dots." An affair, my stomach turned, but the worst was still to come. "She also met with him the night of the attack," Carter continued, 40 minutes before Ethan was found. I felt the air leave my lungs. My wife, my son's former promoter, a secret account, a meeting near the ditch. It wasn't a coincidence. None of it was. That night, I confronted her again, this time without pretense. She was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner, when I dropped the printed bank statements on the counter. "What is this?" I demanded. She glanced down, her expression unreadable. "You went through my finances." "It's our money, Clara, and you've been siphoning it off. Where it going?" "Safety," she said simply. "For me, for us. You never think ahead, Daniel, I do." "Don't you dare spin this as some noble plan," I snapped. "You were planning to leave me." She set the knife down carefully. Maybe I was. "And the affair?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Victor Hammond, how long?" "Does it matter?" she replied coolly. "We haven't been a real couple in years. You know it, I know it." My knees felt weak. "You met with him the night Ethan was attacked." She hesitated barely, but I saw it. "We talked business, that's all." "Business?" I laughed bitterly. "What kind of business ends with my son in a ditch?" Her eyes hardened. "You're accusing me again." I'm done accusing, I know. For the first time, her composure slipped entirely. She slammed her hands on the counter, the sound sharp as a gunshot. I did everything for this family, she shouted. Everything, and he ruined it. He ruined everything. The room went silent. What did he ruin, Clara? I asked softly. She turned away, her shoulders trembling. You don't understand, she whispered. You don't know what he was planning. What was he planning? But she didn't answer. She just walked out, leaving me standing there with my heart pounding and my world collapsing. That night, I sat beside Ethan's bed, holding his hand in the dark. He looked so fragile under the soft glow of the monitors. I wanted to tell him everything, the offshore accounts, the affair, the surveillance footage. But more than anything, I wanted to apologize. I failed you, I whispered. I should have protected you from her. I should have believed you. I don't know if he could hear me, but for the first time since the attack, I thought I saw the faintest flicker of movement, a twitch in his fingers, a shift in his breathing. And with that tiny sign of life, something shifted in me too. I was done being the man who looked the other way. I was done pretending I didn't see the darkness rotting my family from the inside. Clara had secrets, dark, dangerous secrets, and they were tied to what happened to my son. And I was going to drag every last one of them into the light, even if it meant destroying the woman I once thought I loved. The more I uncovered, the less I recognized the woman I had shared half my life with. Clara had always been a mystery, elegant and inscrutable, a woman who spoke in measured tones and wore her emotions like tailored suits, precisely fitted, never out of place. But beneath the veneer, I was beginning to see something monstrous, something that had been there all along, lurking in the shadows, wearing the mask of a loving wife and devoted stepmother. I spent nights digging through old files, receipts, phone records, anything I could get my hands on, and with every page, the picture became clearer. Clara's manipulation didn't start when Ethan dropped out of law school. It didn't start when he left home. It had been there from the beginning, a thread woven through every decision we made as a family. I found emails from over a decade ago, messages to school administrators, teachers, even Ethan's friends' parents. She had campaigned to have him switched out of music classes, pressured teachers to redirect his focus toward more serious pursuits. She'd even tried to block his college application to the music program, going behind my back to contact the admissions office with false concerns about his mental stability. The realization made me sick. She hadn't just disapproved of Ethan's choices, she had systematically tried to erase them. And then there was the sabotage. Mason came by one afternoon carrying a battered laptop and a look of guilt. I wasn't sure if I should show you this, he said, setting the device on the table. But Ethan told me to keep a copy, just in case. It was a series of emails between Clara and a record label executive. In them, she painted Ethan's band as unreliable and volatile, claiming they were involved with drugs and violence, none of which was true. A week later, their contract offer was rescinded. She ruined his shot, Mason said quietly. They were about to sign, they had real momentum, then everything fell apart. I stared at the screen, my hands trembling. Why would she do this? Because she wanted control, Mason replied, and Ethan was slipping away from it. I thought back to all those years, the shouting matches, the slammed doors, the cold silences. And suddenly, they made a terrible kind of sense. Ethan wasn't just rebelling against a strict stepmother. He was fighting for his life, his identity, and I had stood by and let her crush him. One evening, I sat in the hospital cafeteria, staring into a cup of coffee gone cold, when Detective Lyman approached. "We're making progress," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "But we need your help." "With what?" "We're trying to build a motive. We know your wife was near the scene. We know she contacted your son before the attack, but we need to understand why." I hesitated. She's been controlling his life for years. She sabotaged his career, drove him out of the house. Maybe she couldn't stand the thought of him exposing her. Lyman raised an eyebrow. Exposing her for what? I hesitated again, then told him about the offshore account, the secret meetings with Victor Hammond, the possible affair. His expression grew darker with each word. "This could be bigger than we thought," he said. "If money was involved, especially this much money, then your son might have known something that put him in danger." After the detective left, I sat there, replaying the last conversation I'd had with Ethan before we stopped speaking. It was about a year before the attack. We met at a diner on the outskirts of town, one of those awkward father-son meetings where every sentence felt like walking on glass. "She's not who you think she is," he'd said, stirring his coffee with a shaky hand. "She's hiding things, Dad, dangerous things." "What things?" I asked. He'd leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Money, deals, people you don't want to be involved with. I think she's laundering money through some of your accounts." I'd laughed it off at the time, told him he was being paranoid. But now, sitting in the hospital with a detective's words echoing in my ears, I realized he'd been right. The truth was clawing its way to the surface, and it terrified me. Meanwhile, Ethan remained in a coma, but the doctors were cautiously optimistic. His brain activity was improving, his vitals stable. They said he could wake up any day. I both dreaded and prayed for that moment, dreaded it because of what he might reveal, and prayed for it because I needed him to speak. I needed answers. And then, one night, as rain lashed the hospital windows and the clock crept past midnight, he did. It started with a twitch, then a soft groan. I jolted awake from my chair beside his bed, heart pounding. His eyelids fluttered, his fingers twitched against the sheets. "Ethan," I whispered, leaning in close. "It's Dad, can you hear me?" His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then locking on mine. "Dad?" His voice was weak, raw, but unmistakably his. "I'm here," I said, gripping his hand. "You're safe, you're going to be okay." He swallowed hard, his breathing shallow. "It was an accident." "I know," I said softly. "I know, son, just tell me what happened." He closed his eyes, tears leaking from the corners. She called me, said she wanted to talk, said she was sorry." "Clara." He nodded weakly. I didn't trust her, but I went anyway. I thought maybe we could fix things. My heart was racing, and then, "She was angry," he whispered. "Said I was ruining her life. Said if I exposed her, everything she built would collapse." "What was she hiding, Ethan?" He opened his eyes, and the pain in them cut deeper than any words. "Money, laundering, fraud, she used your accounts. I found proof. I told her I'd go to the police." My breath caught, and then, "She hit me," his voice broke, "with something heavy. I fell. She kicked me, said no one would believe me, then she dragged me toward the ditch and left me there." The words hung in the air, cold and final. My wife, the woman I had shared a bed with for 20 years, had tried to murder my son. I sat there long after he fell back asleep, the truth hammering in my chest like a second heartbeat. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. I wanted to go home, pack my things, and never look back. But more than anything, I wanted justice. The next morning, I called Detective Lyman and told him everything Ethan had said. He listened silently, taking notes, his expression grim. "This changes everything," he said. "If we can corroborate his statement with physical evidence, bruising patterns, trace materials, anything, we can move forward with charges." I left the hospital that day feeling something I hadn't felt in years: purpose. The fog of guilt and confusion had lifted, replaced by a clear, burning resolve. Clara had destroyed our family, shattered our lives, and nearly killed our son. But she wasn't going to get away with it. When I walked into the house that evening, she was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea as though nothing in the world was wrong. She looked up and smiled. "How's Ethan?" "Awake," I said, "and talking." The smile faltered for just a fraction of a second. "That's wonderful news." "Yes," I said, stepping closer. "He remembers everything." The color drained from her face. "What do you mean?" "I mean he told me what you did," I said, my voice low and shaking. "The calls, the threats, the attack." For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she sighed and set her teacup down. "I didn't have a choice," she said quietly. My blood went cold. "What?" "He was going to ruin us," she whispered, staring at her hands. "Everything I built, everything we worked for, he was going to destroy it all. By telling the truth." She looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw her for who she truly was. Not the charming woman I'd fallen in love with, not the sophisticated wife everyone envied, but a hollow, desperate person willing to commit the unthinkable to protect herself. "Sometimes the truth destroys people," she said. "And sometimes lies do," I shot back. I left her sitting there in silence, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman I had loved was gone, or maybe she had never existed at all. All that remained now was the truth, and I was ready to let it burn everything to the ground. The morning after Ethan told me the truth, I woke with a heaviness I couldn't shake, a kind of weight that pressed on my chest, making every breath feel shallow. It wasn't just the horror of what Clara had done. It was the realization that I'd built my entire adult life on a lie. The woman I trusted most, the person I believed would protect our family, had been the one trying to destroy it. And worse, I had enabled her every step of the way. The house felt different now. It was the same walls, same furniture, same carefully curated decorations Clara loved so much, but it was hollow, stripped of the illusion of warmth. I walked through the rooms in silence, touching things that now felt foreign: the wedding photos on the mantel, the porcelain figurines she'd collected on our trips, the framed family picture from Ethan's high school graduation. All of it was part of a story that no longer existed. Clara hadn't come home the night before. After our confrontation in the kitchen, she had vanished, no note, no call, no explanation. Part of me hoped she'd packed a bag and left for good. Another part knew she was too cunning for that. Clara didn't run, she recalculated. Detective Lyman called that afternoon. "We're preparing a warrant," he told me. "We'll search the house, seize her devices, dig through her financial records. If your son's statement holds up, we'll have enough to arrest her." I thanked him, but as I hung up, a strange feeling crept in. Relief, yes, but also fear. I wasn't afraid for myself. I was afraid of what Clara might do next. People like her didn't go down quietly. That fear deepened when I returned to the hospital later that day. Ethan was awake, but pale and weak, his eyes rimmed with exhaustion. Still, there was a spark in him I hadn't seen in years, the spark of someone who had finally been believed. "How are you feeling?" I asked softly, pulling a chair beside his bed. "Like I've been hit by a truck," he muttered with a faint smirk, which I guess isn't far off. Despite everything, I laughed, a small, broken laugh that felt like it came from someplace deep inside me. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," I whispered, "for everything, for not believing you, for letting her do this." He turned his head slowly, his eyes meeting mine. "You didn't hit me, Dad, she did." "But I let her," I said. "I stood by while she tore you down. I should have stopped her years ago." Silence settled between us. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, he said, "You can't change what happened, but you can make sure she doesn't hurt anyone else." I nodded, and I promised him I would. Later that evening, as I was leaving the hospital, I noticed a figure standing by the far exit. Even from a distance, I recognized the silhouette, the poised posture, the deliberate stillness. Clara. She was dressed impeccably as always, her hair perfect, her face expressionless. "I thought you disappeared," I said, approaching her cautiously. "I needed time to think," she replied, her voice as calm as ever. "Everything's spiraling out of control. Because of what you did." She looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something I had never seen before. Not guilt, not fear, but a kind of cold, resigned acceptance. "I did what I had to do," she said. "You may never understand that." "Had to do," my voice cracked. "You tried to kill my son." "I didn't mean for it to go that far," she whispered. "I just wanted to scare him, make him stop, but he wouldn't listen. And so you beat him and left him to die." Her jaw tightened. "You think this is all black and white, Daniel, but it's not. He was going to expose everything. And not just me, you too." "What are you talking about?" She hesitated. "The money, the transfers. Do you think the accounts were only mine? They're in both our names. If this goes to trial, you're implicated. They'll drag you down with me." The world tilted beneath my feet. "You're lying." "Am I?" She took a step closer, lowering her voice. "Ask your detective what happens when your name shows up on a federal indictment. Ask him how many years people get for financial crimes like these. I was trying to protect us, Daniel, all of us." I stumbled back a step, my chest tightening. I wanted to believe she was bluffing, manipulating me, as she always did. But deep down, a terrible doubt gnawed at me. Had she really entangled me in her schemes without my knowledge? Had my ignorance made me complicit? She turned to leave but paused at the door. "You can ruin me if you want," she said softly, "but if I go down, you might not walk away either." Her words clung to me like poison long after she was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went through every financial statement, every tax document, every account we'd ever opened. And she was right, many of the transfers bore both our signatures. Many of the accounts were joint. My name wasn't just tied to Clara's crimes, it was written all over them. By morning, panic had replaced anger. I called Carter, the investigator, and explained everything. He was silent for a moment, then said, "She's playing a dangerous game, but she's not entirely wrong. If your name, on those accounts, prosecutors could argue you were involved." "So what do I do?" "Cooperate," he said simply. "Give the police everything. Make it clear you were unaware of the scheme. It's the only way to protect yourself." The idea terrified me, but I knew he was right. That afternoon, I met with Detective Lyman again and handed over every document, every email, every receipt I could find. I told him about Clara's threat, about the accounts, about the possibility that I might be implicated. He listened carefully, taking notes. "Mr. Hughes," he said finally, "if you're truthful and transparent, we can make sure the DA understands you weren't a willing participant. But we need everything, full cooperation." And so I gave it, every ugly detail, every secret I'd been too afraid to face. Meanwhile, Ethan's recovery was slow but steady. He started physical therapy, learning to walk again on legs that had been battered and bruised. His speech improved, his mind sharpened. But there were scars that went deeper than the physical scars I wasn't sure would ever heal. One afternoon, as we sat together in his hospital room, he asked me something that cut deeper than anything Clara had ever said. "Why did you stay with her dad?" I stared at the floor. Because I was afraid of being alone. Because I convinced myself she was what I needed. Because I thought keeping the peace was the same thing as keeping the family together. He nodded slowly, his gaze distant. "You always told me to fight for what's right, but you never fought for me." The words gutted me, I had no defense. "You're right," I whispered. "I failed you, I failed as a father." For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, finally, Ethan sighed. "Just don't fail me now." I promised him I wouldn't. 2 days later, Clara made her boldest move yet. She showed up at the hospital unannounced, striding into Ethan's room like she had every right to be there. I was in the hallway, talking to a nurse, when I heard his voice, raw and trembling with rage. "Get out." "Ethan, please," Clara said, her tone sugar-sweet and utterly false. "I just want to talk." "You tried to kill me," he spat. "There's nothing left to say." "I made a mistake," she said, stepping closer. "But we're still family. We can still fix this." "Family?" His voice cracked. "You're not my family. You're the reason I almost died." I stepped in then, positioning myself between them. "You need to leave," I said firmly. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes flickering between us. Then something changed in her expression, a coldness, a finality. "You think you're winning," she said softly, "but this isn't over." And then she was gone. That night, I sat by Ethan's bedside long after he fell asleep, staring at the faint rise and fall of his chest. Clara's words haunted me. "This isn't over." I knew she meant it. She was too smart, too calculating, too desperate to go quietly. But I also knew something else, something stronger. She had underestimated us. She had underestimated me. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of her anymore. I wasn't her pawn, I wasn't her excuse, and I wasn't her accomplice. I was a father, and I was going to see this through, to the bitter, inevitable end. The morning of Clara's arrest was eerily calm, almost too ordinary, as if the universe had chosen to disguise the moment everything would change beneath a blanket of normalcy. The sun was just rising when I opened the front door to a chorus of sirens and flashing lights. 2 patrol cars and an unmarked sedan pulled up to the curb, and Detective Lyman stepped out, his expression grim but resolute. "Mr. Hughes," he said, nodding to me, "is she inside?" "She's upstairs," I replied quietly. "In the study. She's been there all night." Lyman signaled to his officers. "We have a warrant for her arrest. Stay back and let us handle this." I stepped aside as they entered the house. I heard the heavy thud of boots on the stairs, followed by the muffled sound of voices, firm, commanding, official. And then I heard hers, calm, composed, almost rehearsed. "Do you have any idea who I am?" she asked as they read her rights. "Yes, ma'am," one officer replied flatly. You're under arrest for attempted murder, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and aggravated assault. There was a pause, a heavy, suffocating silence, and then the sound of handcuffs clicking shut. When they brought her down the stairs, she looked exactly as she always had, elegant, poised, unshaken. But there was something in her eyes, a glint of fury, a promise that this wasn't the end. As they led her out the front door, she turned to me. "You think this makes you a hero?" she said quietly, venom dripping from every word. "You're as guilty as I am, don't forget that." I didn't reply, there was nothing left to say. The days that followed were a blur of statements, interviews, and depositions. The prosecutors built their case around Ethan's testimony, the surveillance footage, the financial records, and the evidence collected from the scene. It turned out Clara had used burner phones to contact Victor Hammond, and the police had traced several suspicious money transfers to shell companies under their names. Everything Ethan had said was corroborated, piece by piece, until the story was undeniable. But the real trial, the one that mattered most, wasn't happening in a courtroom. It was happening inside me. I had spent years living under Clara's shadow, convinced that silence was strength, that compromise was love. But now, in the harsh light of truth, I saw those beliefs for what they were: cowardice. And every day, as I watched my son struggle through physical therapy, learning to walk again, learning to live again, that cowardice burned a little deeper. One afternoon, weeks after the arrest, I found myself sitting in Ethan's hospital room, staring at the floor while he practiced walking with a therapist. Each step was shaky, uncertain, but determined. He never once complained. He never once gave up. "Do you hate me?" I asked suddenly. He paused mid-step, gripping the walker tightly. "What?" "For staying with her, for not protecting you, for letting it get this far." He looked at me for a long time, his expression unreadable. "I used to," he said finally, "but hate's heavy. I don't have the energy for it anymore. I don't deserve your forgiveness." "Maybe not," he said, "but I'm going to give it to you anyway. Because holding on to this, it'll eat me alive." I felt tears sting my eyes. "I'm so sorry, Ethan." "I know," he said softly, "and I believe you." In that moment, something shifted between us. Not a full reconciliation, not yet, but the first fragile bridge over a canyon of pain. It was more than I deserved. As the trial date approached, the pressure intensified. Clara's lawyers painted her as a misunderstood wife trying to protect her family. They claimed Ethan attacked her, that she acted in self-defense. They argued that the financial transactions were mutual decisions and that I had full knowledge of them. But the prosecution's evidence was overwhelming. Ethan testified, his voice steady as he recounted the night of the attack. The medical examiner explained how his injuries were consistent with a beating, not a struggle. And then it was my turn. Standing on the witness stand was the hardest thing I've ever done. I laid bare everything: the manipulation, the lies, the years of silent complicity. I admitted that I had ignored warning signs, that I had enabled her behavior, that I had failed my son. "She controlled every part of our lives," I said, my voice trembling. "And I let her. I told myself I was keeping the peace, but I was really just too afraid to confront the truth. My son paid the price for that fear." Clara watched me from across the courtroom, her face a mask of icy disdain. For a brief moment, our eyes met, and I felt something I hadn't felt toward her in years. Nothing. No anger, no sorrow, no longing, just emptiness. The trial lasted 3 weeks. When the verdict finally came, it was almost anticlimactic. "On the charge of attempted murder," the foreman read, "we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of conspiracy to commit financial fraud, guilty. On the charge of aggravated assault, guilty." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Clara sat perfectly still, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She didn't cry, she didn't shout, she didn't even look surprised. When the judge sentenced her to 22 years in prison, she finally turned toward me. "You'll regret this," she said under her breath. "You'll regret betraying me." But she was wrong. For the first time in decades, I didn't regret a thing. The aftermath wasn't easy. The media swarmed us, hungry for headlines about the perfect wife turned predator. Friends and neighbors avoided eye contact at the grocery store. Some believed me. Others whispered that I must have known, that maybe I was involved. But none of that mattered. All that mattered was Ethan. His recovery was slow but miraculous. The scars on his body would fade with time, but the emotional wounds, those were deeper. There were nights when I'd find him staring out the hospital window, silent and distant. Nights when he'd wake up shaking from nightmares. Nights when he'd ask, "Why me?" and I'd have no answer. But with every small victory, every step he took, every smile he managed, every time he called me Dad without bitterness in his voice, I knew we were healing. One evening, a few weeks after the sentencing, we took a walk around the hospital garden. It was a cool autumn night, the leaves crunching beneath our feet, the air crisp and sharp. "What happens now?" he asked quietly. "We rebuild," I said. "We start over, however long it takes." He nodded. "I don't know if I can ever trust people again." "You don't have to," I replied. "Just trust yourself. Trust that you're strong enough to get through this." He stopped walking and looked at me. "And you?" "I'm learning to trust myself too," I said, for the first time in a long time. The silence that followed wasn't heavy like it used to be. It was peaceful, the kind of silence that comes after a storm. That night, after I dropped Ethan back at his room, I sat alone in the parking lot for a long time, staring up at the stars. I thought about the life we had before, the polished, perfect illusion of a family. And then I thought about the life ahead, broken, scarred, but real. The path forward wouldn't be easy. There would be therapy sessions, court appeals, public scrutiny. There would be moments when the weight of guilt would crush me all over again. But there would also be laughter, forgiveness, and maybe, someday, peace. And as I started the car and drove into the night, I realized something I hadn't dared to believe before. This wasn't the end of our story. It was the beginning of a new one written not in silence and fear, but in truth. Clara had taken almost everything from us, but she hadn't taken us. We were still here, still standing, still fighting. And for the first time in years, that was enough. The seasons changed before I even realized it. One morning I stepped outside and the air was cooler, sharper, the trees burning orange and red. A year had passed since the night I found Ethan lying broken in that ditch. A year since my world collapsed and was painfully rebuilt piece by piece. Time hadn't healed everything, maybe it never would, but it had softened the edges of our grief, dulled the rawness of the betrayal. Life was beginning to grow again in the cracks of everything Clara had tried to destroy. The trial had come and gone. Clara's appeal had been denied. She was now inmate 147,392 in the state correctional facility, and though I had promised myself I would never see her again, a part of me knew I needed to. Not for her, but for myself. For closure. For answers I still didn't have. But before that day came, there was Ethan and the slow, sometimes painful journey of rebuilding what we'd lost. We moved him into a small ground-floor apartment with big windows and light streaming through in the mornings. He could walk without assistance now, though his gait was still stiff, his leg muscles weak. The doctor said he might always have some pain, a reminder of the trauma he'd endured. But he was alive. He was alive, and that was enough. We started spending more time together, at first out of obligation, then out of genuine desire. Coffee on Sunday mornings, walks through the park. Dinners that sometimes ended in laughter and sometimes ended in silence, but either way, we were trying. Trust was a fragile thing, and rebuilding it was slow, uneven work. There were moments when I'd catch him studying me with distant eyes, as if searching for the father he used to know. And there were moments when I'd look at him and feel the weight of every mistake I'd ever made. But we kept showing up. And little by little, the distance between us began to shrink. One rainy afternoon, he showed me something that caught me off guard. We were sitting in his living room, the smell of coffee lingering in the air, when he handed me a folder. "What's this?" I asked. "An idea," he said, "a plan." Inside were sketches, outlines, and mission statements for something called the Phoenix Project, a foundation dedicated to supporting victims of domestic manipulation and abuse, especially those trapped in toxic family dynamics. "I've been talking to therapists, lawyers, survivors," he explained, his eyes lighting up with a fire I hadn't seen in years. "There's so much out there for victims of physical abuse, but people who go through psychological abuse, financial control, gaslighting, they get ignored. I want to change that." I flipped through the pages, each one carefully thought out. He'd planned workshops, support groups, legal aid initiatives. "This is incredible," I said, my throat tightening. I want you to help me, he added, his voice quieter now. Not just with funding, with the story, our story. I think people need to hear it. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The thought of exposing our private hell to the world terrified me. But then I looked at my son, at the strength in his eyes, the determination in his voice, and I realized this wasn't about shame anymore. It was about purpose. I'll help, I said, in any way you need. That night, as I drove home, I cried for the first time in months. Not out of sadness, but out of something deeper, a mix of pride, relief, and the faintest hint of redemption. Ethan wasn't just surviving. He was taking the worst thing that had ever happened to him and turning it into something that might save someone else. And in doing so, he was saving me too. Weeks later, I found myself standing in front of the prison gates. The guard checked my ID, stamped a visitor's pass, and led me through a series of cold, sterile corridors until we reached the visitation room. Clara was already there, sitting at a metal table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Even in the drab gray uniform, she looked composed, polished, as if she still believed she could control the narrative. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft, almost affectionate, "it's been a long time." "Too long," I replied, taking a seat across from her. Silence hung between us, heavy and suffocating. I studied her face, searching for traces of the woman I had once loved. There were a few, the familiar arch of her brow, the slight tilt of her head when she was trying to read me, but they felt like ghosts now, echoes of a life that no longer belonged to me. "Why did you come?" she asked finally. "I needed to see you," I said, "to understand." "Understand what?" "How you justified it," I said, my voice trembling. "How you looked at our son, my son, and decided his life was expendable." Her lips parted slightly, but no words came. For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face, not remorse, but something close to it. Maybe regret, maybe just exhaustion. "I never meant to kill him," she whispered. "I just wanted to scare him, to make him stop. Everything I built was on the line. I couldn't let him ruin it." "Everything you built," I repeated. "You destroyed a family. You almost killed your stepson. You lied, manipulated, controlled, all because you were terrified of losing power." She looked up at me then, her eyes suddenly sharp. "You talk about power like you never had any, but you did, Daniel, you always did, and you chose to give it to me. You let me make the decisions. You let me shape our lives. You liked it." Her words cut deeper than I expected, because there was truth in them. I had let her lead. I had surrendered control because it was easier. Because it meant I didn't have to confront the chaos. Because I was weak. "I did," I admitted. "I let you control everything, and that's my greatest regret, but I'm not that man anymore." She tilted her head slightly, studying me. "Do you still love me?" I took a deep breath. I did, once, but now I love the truth more. For a moment, something broke in her eyes, a crack in the mask she had worn for decades. Then she looked away. "You're stronger without me," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied, "I am." The guard signaled that our time was up. As I stood, Clara reached out, her fingers brushing mine for the briefest second. "Tell Ethan," she started, then stopped. "Never mind." I walked out without looking back. In the weeks that followed, life moved forward in small but meaningful ways. The Phoenix Project launched officially 3 months later. We held our first event in a crowded community center, the room filled with survivors, advocates, therapists, and families who had lived through the same invisible battles we once faced. Ethan spoke first, his voice steady and strong, telling our story not as a tragedy, but as a testament to resilience. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the microphone and looked out at the faces before me. "I spent years believing silence was strength," I said. "But silence nearly cost me my son. It protected the person who hurt us instead of the person who needed protecting. I want anyone listening to know this. It's never too late to speak. It's never too late to fight. And it's never too late to change." The applause was thunderous. And in that moment, surrounded by people who understood, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Ethan and I walked home together after the event. The night was cool and clear, the stars scattered across the sky. He slipped his arm around my shoulder, a simple gesture, but one that meant more than words ever could. "You did good, Dad," he said softly. "No," I replied, smiling through the tears I didn't bother hiding. "We did good." We walked the rest of the way in silence. The kind that wasn't heavy or awkward, but full of forgiveness, full of love, full of a future we were finally ready to claim. In the end, Clara's actions nearly destroyed us, but they also forced us to confront truths we had been running from for too long. They stripped away the illusions, burned down the lies, and left us with something raw and real. And from those ashes, we rose not as the broken remnants of a shattered family, but as something new, something stronger, something honest. I found my son in a ditch, half dead and whispering the most devastating words I'd ever heard. It was my wife. But those words, as horrific as they were, became the beginning of something greater. They were the spark that ignited our awakening, the catalyst that turned pain into purpose. I lost my marriage, I lost the life I thought I wanted, but in the end, I gained something far more precious, a second chance. A chance to be the father my son deserved, a chance to live a life rooted in truth, a chance to build a legacy that wasn't about control or appearances, but about love, resilience, and the power of starting over. And for that, I will always be grateful.